Tompa Eszter was a 22-year-old beautiful young woman who lived in the suburban area of Győr, and the area where she lived was called Sashhegypuszta. She worked as a waitress in town, and because of her beauty and great personality, she was a very popular person. Sadly, I wish I could tell you more about who she was, her interests, her hobbies, what she wanted from life. I wish she was famous for something, anything other than how her life was taken away from her. But sadly, just like with most other Hungarian cases, there is almost no information about the victims. The 22nd of September 2003 marks a tragic day. In the early afternoon, two young girls, a 13-year-old and a 5-year-old, were walking home from school on the street when Esther passed by them by bike. She was biking in the same direction on the street as them, and they said hello to each other because she knew the two little girls, but Esther didn't stop to talk with them because she was in a hurry to visit her mom and to bring her groceries, as it was her day off from work. Only a minute or two passed by, and according to the two little girls who were the only eyewitnesses at the scene, a dark red matte car passed by them, which was also going in the same direction as they were and as well as Esther was. The two little girls saw that a man was driving the car and he seemed to be alone inside. And then in about 300 meters distance, they saw that the car suddenly came to a stop. The man got out of the car, went around it, got back inside and sped away. But the little girls still didn't think anything out of this at all. Now, it wasn't until the two little girls caught up and got to that part on the street where they had seen the car suddenly stopping. And there they saw that Esther's bike was just in the ditch and the groceries scattered all around on the ground, but Esther was nowhere to be seen. These two little girls were completely naive and unsuspecting. They just stood there, astounded, not understanding what could have happened. And suddenly another young man came by and saw these two girls observing the bike. So this young man asked what had happened there, what they had seen. The little girls told him what they had seen, so the man started theorizing that maybe Esther was so scared of this car passing by her suddenly that maybe she either jumped or fell off the bike and ran into the bushes that were along this ditch. So the man, trying to see if his theory was correct, he went between the bushes calling out for her name, but to no answer. However, suddenly the same dark red car came back around, and this time, as the car was passing by, the driver was waving at the little girls and the man as he was passing by. And the little girls didn't know what to do about this situation. They didn't know where Esther could have gone, and this young man also didn't really know what to do, so they just left the scene. And to my knowledge, Esther was not reported missing by any one of her family members that day, though I may be wrong about that. Esther was found the next day on the very other side of the city next to a river by a woman who was walking her dog. And poor Esther, she was subjected to a terrible fate. She was beaten severely, she suffered a lot of injuries, she was dragged around in the dirt on the ground. She was strangled by hand, and her cause of death was asphyxiation with a cord. And it was clear at first glance that it was not committed for financial gain because Esther never really kept anything of high value on her person. No, this murder looked very brutal and very personal. It seemed like a crime of passion. So the police decided to look into every person in Esther's life. They found a pretty good suspect early on. It was her ex-boyfriend who she had broken up with a few months before the murder. And this ex-boyfriend didn't really take it very well that their relationship was over. So it came to the police's attention that this ex-boyfriend had even tried to hire a couple of guys to beat up and damage the car of Esther's new boyfriend as an act of revenge. But these guys he tried to hire at first were in on the plan, but in the end, luckily, they never ended up following through with it. But this ex-boyfriend still looked like a very good suspect. Though with just a little bit of investigation, it became clear to the police that he had a rock-solid alibi for the time of the murder, and so did all of those guys that he had tried to hire. So there was nothing to indicate that they were the one to kill this poor woman. Then Esther's family members, new boyfriend, all the employees and all the guests of the restaurant where she used to work at were also eliminated as suspects. And on top of that, the police had a DNA sample from the scene, but it was not a match to anyone in their system. And the police decided to put up a reward of 2 million forints, which was never increased. So now in 2021 it would be worth about $6,300. As a result, soon enough a woman came forward saying that she had seen a man standing next to a matte dark red Volkswagen Passat type car in a foresty area near a gravel quarry, and that the car's license plate had started with the letter B. And the police looked into all of the cars that matched this description, which was no less than 1,300 cars, but to no avail. There was no match. Sadly, the tip, however good, did not lead to a new suspect. The police got over 100 tips, well, mainly for the reward money, but also because of the police sketch that they had released of the perpetrator, which was created based on the two little girls' memory alone. And the police claimed that they looked into every person of interest, investigated every lead, every possibility, and came up with all of the theories that they could come up with. So let's look into some of those. It really seemed as though Esther's murder could have only been sexually motivated, even though there was no sign of that on the body or on the scene, only because there was no other logical explanation to what had happened to her. She fought for her life hard, so it seemed likely that she could have injured her attacker either on the face or on the chest or on the arms. And the police really hoped that maybe somebody would come forward that their friend or family member came home with such injuries, but that never happened. Nobody ever reported anything. It also seemed likely that the victim and the killer did not personally know each other, and the investigators really thought of every possibility. But their strongest theory was that Esther fell victim to a sexually motivated crime of opportunity. In the case of such an evidently brutal murder, there is no statute of limitations in Hungary. So no matter how far into the future, but the killer was going to serve for his crime. Sadly, with the lack of new tips and new leads, the case went cold, and in the February of 2005 it was officially suspended, though not closed, and it went completely cold for the next 13 years. Can you even imagine how long 13 years is? That's half of my life. Esther may have gotten married and had multiple kids already, turning to be teenagers. But instead her life was taken so young and so unjust and so brutally. But the murder wasn't going to be unsolved forever, because on the 5th of September 2016, a dog breeder reported the theft of his newborn puppies, which was one chocolate Labrador and the last were French bulldogs. So as you can see, very expensive breed. Their value summed up to over 1.2 million forints. Only a month later, the police announced that they had caught the two thieves, one of which was a 36-year-old man who admitted to the theft. But get this, because the police almost did not take his DNA sample, because the summarized value of the stolen puppies barely passed the minimum value that would grant the warrant for a DNA sample to the police. But thank God they were able to take his DNA, and as they ran it in their system, they saw that it was a match to the one found at Esther's murder scene. It really seemed like sheer luck or mere coincidence, because pretty much everybody had given up on solving Esther's murder case. And the puppy thief was now rightfully worried that it was only the matter of time before the police knocked on his door to arrest him for the murder. And this is exactly what happened on the 11th of January 2017. And when he was interrogated, he admitted to the crime and gave his full confession. And I think it's going to make you just as mad as it made me, not only because of how brutally and unjustly this poor woman was murdered, but also because it was nothing what the police had theorized. Everything just seems so unlikely. But before we get into the details of the murder, let's see who the killer even was. It was a man named Attila, meaning that his family name starts with the letter Ash, and his given name is Attila. As you already know from my channel, that's the way to keep the murderers anonymous, because somehow they have the right to stay anonymous. And at the time of his capture, he was 36 years old, and at the time of the murder, he was 23 years old, making him essentially the same age as Esther was. In 2003, he used to work as a truck driver, but he had the arbitrary way of supplementing his salary by stealing barrels of gasoline from the delivery company that he used to work at as the truck driver. He kept these barrels of gasoline in a hiding spot in the forest near where Esther's mom used to live. That is how he was so familiar with the area, despite being from another town called Gönyű, which is arguably the weirdest name I have ever heard in my life. But anyway, anytime he needed some cash, or I guess anytime he had the opportunity, he would just go and pick up a barrel of gas to sell it. And this is exactly what he did that very same day when Esther was so brutally murdered. While he was driving past the two little girls, he got a phone call on his mobile phone. And I think we all know how dangerous and distracting it is to drive while talking on the phone. But sadly, it looks like Attila didn't know any better and picked up the phone, consequently hitting Esther, who was only 300 meters ahead of those two little girls. The car knocked Esther off of her bike and she fell into the ditch next to the road, and she lost consciousness, but she was otherwise unharmed. When Attila realized what he had done, he got out of the car and saw Esther lying there in the ditch, fainted. And Attila panicked. He thought that Esther had died. I guess he didn't know that it's not as easy to kill someone, and he panicked. He didn't know what to do. So he decided to pick her up and put her into the trunk and drive around town until he could figure out what to do with her dead body. And that was when he passed by the two little girls who were observing the scene and wondering where Esther had gone when her bike was left behind. Suddenly, though, he heard muffled sounds and scratches coming from the trunk, and he drove all the way to this deserted road in this meadowy area and opened the trunk and saw that Esther was very much alive, terrified and panicked and scared for her life. Of course she was panicked. She just woke up in someone's trunk. I don't even know how I would feel in that situation. But because of that, Attila got even more panicked than he already was. And he went on and decided to make the worst decision ever, which was to kill Esther out of sheer panic. I guess he thought that if Esther was to press charges because of not only the car accident that he had caused by picking up the phone, but also by now kidnapping her in the trunk of his car, he was going to go to jail. And he did not want to do that, of course. He had a little girl and he wanted to see her grow up into an adult. So he thought that the only way to avoid going to jail was by killing Esther. Esther was fighting for her life with her arms, with her legs. She was biting. She did everything in her power, but this man was stronger than her, and he was able to overpower her. So he took her out of the trunk, dragged her around on the ground, as you already know, and dragged her into the bushes, where he started beating her, causing her no less than 43 different injuries. And the beating went on for about 30 minutes. And then he strangled her with his hands, which would last about 15 minutes. Because believe it or not, it's not that easy to kill someone. This man was looking into her eyes, trying to strangle her for 15 minutes. And in the end, he decided to finally just end her life with a piece of cord that he took off front of the hay bales. But let me just stop there, because I don't understand how he thought that this was a justifiable good idea. I don't understand how he thought that he was going to avoid going to jail by murdering someone. For the car accident that he had caused, if Esther pressed charges at all, he probably would have just paid a monetary fine and would have gone on to live his life as if just like nothing happened. He could have even got out of this after kidnapping her. Had he just released her from the trunk, let her go home, she probably wouldn't even have pressed charges, because if she was so afraid, she probably wouldn't want to go on court trying to face her kidnapper. But even if she had pressed charges for the kidnapping, he probably would have just been on probation or something like that. Even during the beating or the strangling, had he let her go, he probably would have only served a few years in prison. But this man really went all or nothing, as if he was trying to get life in prison. But I don't know, let me know what you think of this in the comment section, because I don't understand how somebody can go and make the wrong decision so many times over and over and over again. How could he continuously think that this was the right thing to do? I don't know how during those at least 45 minutes of trying to kill someone, it didn't strike him not once to just stop. Why? I don't understand. But back to the story. After the murder, he just left her on that deserted road in the bushes and went to pick up his daughter from the kindergarten. Then he returned to the scene at night and removed her body from that area and transported her to the other side of the town, next to the river, where she was going to be found the next day. But that wasn't the end of his plan, of course, because now he had to think about what to do with his car. He knew that at least 3 people had sighted him at the scene. He reported his car missing to the authorities and then drove all the way to Slovakia to an illegal car wrecker. And yes, you heard that sentence right, because it made absolutely no sense. He first reported his car missing and then drove to Slovakia to drop his car off in this illegal car wrecker. And Slovakia only joined the Schengen Agreement in 2007, so 4 years after Hungary did, and that meant that the border between the two countries were patrolled very heavily. And even the border patrol did not notice, I guess, that this guy just crossed the border with a vehicle that had just been recently reported as stolen. And he kept his secret for the next 13 years from absolutely everyone. Not even his closest friends and family members knew what he had done. By the way, he was on the police's radar in 2010 for a petty theft, but nothing came out of that situation. But now, with this full confession, the police was finished with the investigation, and his trial started on the 8th of February 2018. And he was accused of first-degree murder with a vile motive executed with extraordinary cruelty. Vile because he committed the kidnapping and the murder for an absolutely selfish reason of trying to save his ass from the car accident that he had caused, and extraordinary cruelty because Esther did not suffer essentially any injuries from the car accident. Other than fainting, she was perfectly fine. But she suffered 43 different injuries during the beating and the strangulation that could have been potentially life-threatening or life-altering had she survived, but none of which were necessary for simply taking away her life. It was torture, and a long one at that. Attila's biggest aggravating factor was not coming forward for 13 years. He tried his best to get away with murder. He wasn't going to go and give himself up to the police. His only mitigating factor was showing remorse and confessing, but only once he was caught. So, like, how genuine and honest is that? He said that he takes responsibility for the murder. He agrees that what he did was terrible, but he denies that it was vile and extraordinarily cruel because he was only 23, he was too young and didn't know what to do in such situation, and he just couldn't give a valid explanation to why he murdered Esther, especially in such a brutal way. But if you were to ask me, I would say that 23 is not young at all. If you are old enough to have a kid who already goes to kindergarten, then you should be wise enough to know that kidnapping, murder, torture, covering up a crime, but just talking on the phone while driving are all the wrong decisions. How would you not know that these are all wrong? How could he not know right from wrong and blame it on his young age, which wasn't even that young? Anyway, in the end, he got life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before he could be paroled. He, of course, appealed his sentence, but it was rejected, and he was also given a 10 million forint fine to pay. But before we finish, I think we should look at all the 4 factors that prevented this crime from being solved earlier. First of all, the eyewitnesses didn't give an accurate description of the perpetrator. As we know, the 2 witnesses were a 13-year-old and a 5-year-old little girl. And I'm sure that they did their best. I'm sure that they understood the gravity of the situation. And any eyewitness at any age could have made a mistake or have the wrong memory, but only having children as reliable eyewitnesses was definitely not the best for the police. Besides, the girls only saw the man for mere seconds when he drove past them, when they saw him getting out of the car 300 meters ahead of them, and then the last time when he came back around by car. These 2 little girls only saw him for about, 3-5 seconds, and they had to recall his face from memory based on that. Besides, the girls remembered him as much older than he really was. Because, well, they were children. Children often perceive adults as older than they are. I know when I was 13, I thought that everybody older than me was old as fuck. So, sadly, as a result, the police sketch looked nothing like Attila in real life. Secondly, the police wasn't searching for the same car as what Attila drove, because the 2 girls remembered the car to be dark red with a matte finish. And this was also supported by that woman who said that she had seen a dark red car and a man standing next to it with the license plate starting with a B, if you remember. But Attila's car was not this dark red Volkswagen Passat. It was a bright red Opel, and the color alone caused a lot of confusion during the search. So it was no use that the police spent so much time looking at 1,300 cars that matched this description, because Attila's car was neither of those. And by this time, his car was in that illegal car wrecker anyway. Thirdly, the police did not have the correct theory of what had gone down, because even though they thought of the possibility of a hit-and-run accident, it was their weakest theory. As I said, it looked like Esther fell victim to a crime of opportunity or a sexually charged crime of passion. In the case of a hit-and-run accident, the person who causes the accident usually speeds away, leaving the poor victim behind helplessly. Or if it really was a hit-and-run accident and the driver may have taken the victim to the doctor with the injuries, that still wouldn't explain why Esther would have left her belongings, her bike and her groceries in the ditch just like that. She surely would have at least picked them up normally to come back to them later, or even better, take them with her if she could. But because the things were just left there in the ditch lying around, it really looked like she was kidnapped. But why would had she been kidnapped after a hit-and-run accident? If you think about it, now knowing all of the details, you can admit that this doesn't make any sense at all, and Attila's decisions didn't make any sense at all. It simply seemed too illogical to be true. Attila behaved like a serial killer or a serial kidnapper rapist, when in reality he was just your average dumb fuck. So the police rightfully thought that it was a kidnapping or intentional murder, because all the signs led to this conclusion. And the final reason is that he kept his secret very well. He did not tell it to absolutely anybody for 13 long years. And it worked out in his favor, because as we know from other cases, the killer eventually gets snitched on if he lets his secret slip. And if Attila didn't fuck it up for himself, didn't get involved with the theft of the puppies, we probably still wouldn't know that he was the killer. But Attila said that he was always terrified. He always knew that he could get caught at any second. He always knew that the police could knock on his door any day to arrest him. He knew that even if he wasn't convicted for the theft of the puppies, he probably would have been caught because of the advancements in technology. The only reason why he never came forward was because he wanted to see his daughter grow up. And partially I am happy that this little girl had a dad in her life and she grew up with a father figure. But I am also very sad for how she must have felt when after all of those long years she learned that her dad was not only a liar but also a brutal murderer. But I am also very angry about how Attila thought that he somehow deserved to see his daughter grow up. There is a very big reward, a big prize that he definitely did not deserve by murdering someone. I don't understand how he could think selfishly that he was somehow entitled to seeing his daughter grow up after he took that away from Esther's family. They never get to see their daughter achieve things in life, getting married, possibly having kids, having a fulfilling career, buying her first home. But in the end, Attila said that he was relieved that the secret was out, because keeping a secret, however terrible, is exhausting, especially for so long. I don't know, I guess if you have any book or movie recommendations about people who were not born to be murderers like fucking Ted Bundy, but they ended up as one, then let me know down in the comments section. And also if you have any questions, comments or case suggestions, please do let us know down in the comments section as well. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed my presentation, subscribe to the channel because I have cool videos like this pretty much every week, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Thank you so much for watching and I see you next time. Bye!